You come to me when I'm lonely. I take your hand and we go home.
Hello. Thank you so much for joining us at Ghost Stories by the Fire.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
So, I'd love to ask you the question that I ask all of my guests, which is: did you grow up in a house that told ghost stories or believed in ghosts and the afterlife?
Well, we did spend a lot of time at my grandparents' farm in upstate New York called Bonnie Bray. And my grandmother loved to use the Ouija board because there were lots of things that she wanted answers to. One of them was the disappearance of one of our relatives called Lola. And there was lots of speculation about what happened to her and where was this and where was that. And I'll never forget the night that the Ouija board spelled out Lola in the lake. And so that sort of set our family at least somewhat at peace that Lola was in the lake. But the farmhouse itself was very spooky. It was supposedly an underground railroad station at one time, but downstairs in the cellar, it had a dirt floor, it had a furnace that had been put in, I think, right after World War II, but it was always freezing cold. And we could hear things. The kids all slept in one room, and we all heard things in different parts of the house. So Nana, being very Scottish and very pragmatic, was just, those are just the voices, ignore them.
So she was pragmatic in the fact that not only were there voices and ghosts, but but you could communicate with them just like you would a regular person, only she used a Ouija board.
She used a Ouija board, and it was more like a thrilling piece of entertainment. But she was also very Scottish in her pragmatism. Is like, you don't get over emotional about it. You don't talk about it. Subject is closed. And so once it was mentioned, it was never mentioned again.
And did you know which lake Lola of the Lake was in?
I wish we had asked more questions as kids. It was just one of those things where we heard that, and it was just hush, hush. There was a lot of nervous energy around it. And Nana was convinced that was the answer where Lola was.
That's wonderful that your family got a bit of closure around that. So I would imagine that late into the night, you with all of your brothers and sisters sleeping in one room in a haunted, like it sounds like this place was centuries, over 100 years old.
Yes.
Would you?
I have an identical twin sister. So, of course, we were hijinks geared up to believe every peep, every sound as being something from the other side. So there was a lot of nervous energy about all that.
Now, you and your twin sister, now she's an identical twin. Is that correct?
Yeah, she's an identical twin. We're very close. She lives in California. I live in New York, and we talk every day.
And you talk every day on the phone via text, or do you speak in that invisible way that twins are known to communicate?
Well, supposedly Cynthia and I did have twin speak, and that we did not talk to our parents. And I remember my mother saying it was like raising, Martians, because they would come into the bedroom when we were in the crib and we'd be jabbering away at each other. And then my mother would come in and we'd both go and not talk to her. And in the baby book, Cynthia's first words, I believe she must have been over 2. We were in Florida living at the time, and my dad stopped very quickly at an intersection. And her first words were not mama, dada, but they were, watch it, you jerk. Because we had been so used to talking amongst ourselves that we just picked up language, but we never interacted with other adults.
That's interesting. So you were actually practicing conversation with your twin in a way that probably put you ahead cognitively in terms of being able to communicate than other 2-year-olds.
Yes, and I'm not sure what language we were speaking. I mean, if you were to ask us today, neither one of us would know what it is, but I do know that we have an unspoken biorhythm. I have migraines sometimes. When she has migraines, I can sense when she's upset. She can sense when I'm upset. We have premonitions together. So we're definitely clued in to some sort of energy ley line.
Right. That links the two of you together, it's so beautiful. It seems like the ultimate intimacy. to have. So you say that the two of you have premonitions together, as in future cognition of things that will be occurring in the future, or something else?
Well, sometimes we both have feelings of unease where we reach out to each other and say, I feel like something's happening. Me too. I don't know what it is. And then later on, we find out what it is.
That's so interesting. Now, I know that you are also, a large part of your life is in the tarot world. And in tarot and in just tarot practice, as a general sense, there's a lot of emphasis on psychic and intuitive development. So I'm curious, does the connection and the intuition shared by you and your sister, does it have the same timbre as, say, an intuition or a psychic pop that you get separately from your sister? In other words, when it happens between the two of you, does it feel different than if something was going to intuitively pop into your head just in your own life, with nothing to do with your sister?
Well, I do say that there are times, and I don't know if this happens to you, Sasha, when you're doing a tarot reading, sometimes a card reading will just spread out and the meaning of what the archetypes are saying just happens. Just as clear as when I feel Cynthia is trying to reach out to me. There's been a couple times when I've done readings where I see things like someone's in a car accident without a seatbelt, and I've said that in a reading and asked a friend to please be careful. And she mentioned years later that she always buckled up because of that reading. And they were in a terrible car accident that would have been disastrous if she hadn't worn her seatbelt. So I feel that there are times in my tarot readings where whatever that weird bubble of time is, where an event is floating freeform, I can't explain it, but somehow I'm able to access that and other energies.
That's so interesting. Does your sister practice tarot as well?
She likes the cards. She doesn't really use it as an active practice like I do. And I have to be very judicious when I use my tarot readings for her because, she can take them very, very much to heart. And because she's gone through the recent loss of her husband of 40 years, I have to be very careful about what energies I draw up that aren't obvious and distressing.
Yes, yes. Okay, so that actually leads me, to the next question that I'd love to ask you about communication with people who have passed over on the other side. Is that something you've ever experienced?
Yes, actually, and I don't talk about this very much, but I was married before, and my first husband died of a brain cancer. And the night after he died, I had a waking dream where we used to live in Seattle, and he was wearing one of the shirts that I bought him. And I sat up in bed, and he was there, and he told me that he was going to be all right. And then he was gone. And I kept saying it was just a dream. It was just a dream. But I was sitting up looking at the end of my bed where he was. So the dream actually, if I was that asleep, it actually manifested to what I felt like was a presence. So that was one of the strongest feelings of somebody being there. But my twin sister and I have been going through quite a bit lately with the passing of her husband coming to visit us both. And it's been both wonderful and very unnerving at the same time.
Can you tell us more about it?
Sure. I have to say, I did ask Cynthia for permission to tell this story because it's very intimate and very weird. And it's sort of disclosing family secrets. So I'll start.
This is a safe space.
Great. This past year, my current husband, my wonderful husband, Robert, and I were in Italy. And we had gone knowing that Cynthia's husband, Eric, might be in final days. And when we had left to go, I was very torn. I was in Los Angeles saying goodbye to him. And I said, I can't wait to come back and tell you all about it. I can't wait to tell you about Italy. And he said, go, have a wonderful time. And I knew that was going to be the last time I saw him. So we were in our hotel room, and Cynthia called and said, because of the events of the day, she had had some lovely women come over. They were like death docents, who had done some energy work with him. And they advised Cynthia that they thought that Eric was going to pass that night. So Cynthia called us, I think it was around 11 o'clock in the morning, Milan time. And she had just called a friend, please come over. It was like 2 o'clock in the morning in Los Angeles. And we went on FaceTime. So we were having like this online situation where Eric was breathing very heavily, sort of in his death rattle. Cynthia's friend came over, and we just kept trying to coach Eric through the end, trying to reassure him that everything was going to be okay. He'd been sick with multiple myeloma for about 16 years, 14 years, and he was suffering terribly at the end, but he did not want to leave. He did not want to leave my sister. So during this process, which lasted about 45 minutes, he started to go. Now, his eyes were closed. And then towards the end of this, he opened his eyes and pointed to the other side of the room and said, I need to get to there. And Robert said, don't worry, Eric, we're going to take care of Cynthia. And then he had a big death rattle, and the lights in the bedroom turned off, and our FaceTime connection went to black with a very, very bright, vivid pattern of color. We had never seen anything like it before. It was unbelievable. And Eric was a phenomenal artist. He was a stained glass artist, a photographer, a food photographer, a ballet dancer. I mean, he was art itself. Yeah. So he left this planet, turning off the light and sending us this image. So we got right back online saying, is he okay? And she said, no, he's passed. So then we processed the rest of Eric's passing. You know, she arranged for him to be taken care of. We had a beautiful ceremony for him later on. And Cynthia and I were FaceTiming or Zooming, one of these apparatus. And in the middle of our talk, that exact same image appeared to both of us.
Oh my
God. This was a very intense pattern of colors. And this pattern of colors began to shift and morph like it was speaking to us. It started off with a very gray, violet, white combination. And then it changed to a fuchsia, pink, rose. And then it would go back and forth with a black line every once in a while. And within all these striations, it was moving. And Cynthia was very upset when she first saw it. And she said, Eric, is that you? And the colors got a little more intense. And they started moving a little more vividly. So she did it for a little while, and then she got overwhelmed and said, I'm sorry, I just can't do this. So she had to hang up. And then I had to think to myself, now, how can I help her through this? Because this is totally weird. Everybody we've talked to in tech says it's not possible for two people to have both of their screens taken over with some sort of pattern. That just doesn't happen. So I had to think, if this happens again, how can I help Cynthia see this? So sure enough, it happened again. And during that time, because I was on my iPhone, I just kept taking snapshots of it, screenshots of it over and over again. And so that she could see what it was. The next time that it happened, I was walking down to Bed Bath & Beyond, talking to my sister on the phone. And in the middle of our conversation, Eric's colors show up. And they go crazy. They're like zipping across the screen, like dancing and all this other stuff. And I'm on a busy New York City street. And I'm going, hi, Eric. I'm running an errand right now. Help you? What's happening? And so that lasted for quite a while. And I took some screenshots of that. And then Cynthia said, I just don't know what to think about this. I don't know what he's saying. I don't know what he wants from me. And I said, I think because he was such an artist, he's trying to come through the only way that he can through the vibration of color. Oh. Literally vibrating. Now, there were a couple last incidences where we were having conversations in her house, and he showed up again. Now, this time, he showed up on the computer instead of just two phones. So I was able to take my iPhone and record it as a movie of how these bars were moving.
So wait, so you were, when the colors appeared on the computer, you were actually in the room with your sister Cynthia. So then rather than being on the iPhone, it was on the computer.
I was on my computer in New York. She was on her computer in Los Angeles. But because I was on my computer, I picked up my iPhone and I started recording it like a movie. And so I could show her what it looked like. Do you want me to show it to you?
Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So this is the latest one.
Oh my good, that is beautiful.
Now, it went on, and you can sort of see some of it because of the glare. There, that's how you can see it.
Susan, I have never ever seen anything like that.
It's just so weird. It's like all these long bars and lines of interactive mitochondria moving in fuchsia and white and gold and purple. And when we would talk, it would go faster and slower depending on what we were talking about.
You're It's
Yeah.
so beautiful. It really does look like art. It is the most extraordinary tones of pink and fuchsia and
Yes, and here we have, I'm going to just do a quick screenshot for you to see. This is the very first time it showed when I was walking down the street. I was just taking snapshots. So you can see that it started with fuchsia, and then it turned to a white and a rose. And then there was always this sort of like dark band in there too. So until I figured out how to film it instead of just take snapshots, I sent it to Cynthia. And, this visitation, and we're both pretty convinced it is a visitation from Eric, has a strata of feelings with it. For Cynthia, who's still really mourning the loss of Eric, sometimes she's very vulnerable and tender, and it's like, hi, honey, how are you? I wish I could understand what you're saying. And then other times it's so overwhelming, she has to hang up.
yeah.
She can't process it anymore. But I think having the images helps her feel like it's real, because you feel crazy. I think this is what happens sometimes when we see these things. We dismiss that thing at the top of the stairs. We dismiss that shadow over there. Our brains can't take it in. And so this at least has been helpful for her to feel like Eric is probably passing still, but he's sending her his love in the way that he can best express it.
And the fact that it's repetitive, the fact that it's not just a one-time off, that just seems like such a gift.
And that it's the same sort of image that he sent when he passed. It's coming back. It's like his signature energy. And it's coming back and reinventing itself and saying, I'm alive in this way. I think Cynthia's talked about this, so you don't feel crazy. She's talked about this to her therapist, to her friends, to other people. And all they can say is, I don't know what that is.
Yeah. I think it's the most comforting thing I've ever heard.
Well, yeah. I mean, even Robert, who's somewhat agnostic, said this has really changed his mind about what's on the other side.
I think that therein lay the heart and soul of the ghost story. Do you know? I think that this is why, we all gather around and want to get spooked and listen to spooky stories because it's fun and it gets our blood racing and we kind of sit on the edge of our seats. But behind all of that visceral feeling really is often life-affirming stories of enduring love, right? Of something before and something after this experience on Earth. And I think that that's a beautiful thing.
I mean, we want reassurance, I think most of us do, that there is continuation after we pass, but what is it? Where is it? You hear stories of even the ghost of Secretariat, the great horse, still pounding, where he trained to run so fast. And so that energy is still there. At Stonehenge, they say you can still hear the battles at King Arthur's, places in Cornwall. So maybe is it our imagination that's picking up frequencies, or are those frequencies there for the right tuning fork to pick up? It's a quandary.
It's a quandary. It's a mystery. And I think it's one worth exploring because whether or not in this lifetime we'll ever get a solid answer is almost, I think, beside the point, right? I always say mysteries are meant to be explored. They're not meant to be explained. And I'll share that a few weeks after my own father had passed. I was in my apartment. Something very exciting had just happened. I had just gotten this really wonderful message that I was thrilled about. I look down into my computer and an email pops through. I got a new subscriber to my website with the name of Michael Sullivan, which was my father's name.
What?
And I thought, oh, he's sharing this moment with me. I mean, yeah, for sure. Michael Sullivan is a Michael and Sullivan are common names, but the timing, my emotional tenor, when it came through, I literally like dropped my laptop and was like, "Oh my god."
Thanks, Dad.
It's so wild, and it's so wonderful. Do you, because Eric, your brother-in-law, because he was an artist, do you think that you or Cynthia might ever do something with that artwork, even if it was just only for yourselves, print it up, or I don't know,
I've offered
painted?
it to her, but she's not ready if that is to happen. So I'll wait for her if she ever wants it. I mean, several people have offered to turn it into fabric or, art, wall art, but it seems like such a weird,
Yeah.
it's a tribute, but a diminution of him. So she needs to feel like it's right.
Yeah, and then and at that point, then it becomes something else, right? It's not necessarily the communication. Thank you, and thank you to Cynthia for allowing us to talk about this, because it's a tender space. But I'm super curious. You have been an actress in the theater, on stage, on Broadway, on film and television, for over 30 years. And certainly, I know a lot of artists and actors talk about when they're doing work that they're actually channeling energies. And I'm so curious, do you ever feel like in your professional life that you're channeling the energy of a character that you've played?
I can say that there are times when you're playing somebody who's really out there, you have to really be careful. I think there's a saying or there's an understanding that when you do magic, you have to protect yourself and before and after. And it's the same way with doing a role. When I was doing Blanche Dubois, it was a really tough excursion into a mindset that the mind breaks. And I realized towards the end of the run of that, I'm not going to last much longer doing this. This is tough. I mean, yes, you're acting, schmacting, but you're playing a person who is raped by her brother-in-law, who is desperate, who has no choices left, and everything that she held dear about how she saw herself has been destroyed. And so I really was looking forward to the end of that run because the dangerous energies of her frailty began to inhabit me. And I was very glad to see that run. And I know that when Vivian Leigh also did the role, many people felt the beginning of her mental problems started playing that role.
Oh, wow. And so would you attribute that to the energy of Blanche Dubois as a character, or would you say that it probably happens more just from being in that headspace of, 8 to 10 times a week, going through a mental breakdown, and that perhaps the body and the mind can't separate necessarily play acting from its actual happening?
Yeah, and I know there's lots of amazing actors who can do things like King Lear and Lady Macbeth, and they don't have to kill or go crazy, and they can withstand that. But for some reason, that particular mindset, I was not channeling the energies right.
Hmm.
I know some people do it brilliantly, and hats off to them. But there are lots of instances of actors who like I think Daniel Day-Lewis is a good example. He's all in. He's in character on set. He's a little overinvested. And you have to see, he was also the one who had a nervous breakdown when he was doing Hamlet and walked off stage. So
Hmm.
you can see where sometimes you can just be taking all sorts of wrong turns inside your head with those energies. And not Blanche Dubois itself, but the pathways, just like reaching a very scary energy during a tarot reading. And you're going, okay, we're going to
I don't want to, I'm not going to step into that particular shadow and share space with
Exactly.
that thing. Did you have rituals that you would do? Did you have any sort of, or do you have any sort of protective rituals that you do when you're either writing or playing a role?
Well, I think that the wonderful thing about acting is that you come back, and as you take everything off, wigs, makeup, costumes, there's a sort of sanctity about, understanding this is gone, this is leaving. Talk like yourself. Stop using the accent. So I think that that's all a symbolized ritual in a way.
Yeah.
But I think sometimes you can ask for protection as you're getting ready to do these things with yourself.
I think that's fascinating because certainly in all the world's religions, in ritual, there's such a theatricality. For example, in the Catholic religion, which you've got music and art and architecture and these incredible costumes and jewels if you happen to be in a cathedral and golden chalices, and it is such theatricality, but the it's useful, right? Because it brings the practitioners into a sacred space, just like in a theater when the audience goes in sort of ready to receive something, a lesson or some entertainment. It's quite similar. I'm curious, Susan. Um, Theaters. I've had occasion to be in empty theaters, and it's a funny thing to walk into an empty theater because they're actually quite full within the silence of an empty theater. There's almost like it's a quite thunderous silence. They tend to be very spooky places. You are, in fact, often raising the dead, speaking the word of dead poets and playwrights and famous characters and iconic characters. So, have you ever had any interesting spooky experiences in the theater?
Well, there was a very old theater in Pittsburgh. We were doing a play called Dancing at Lunasa by Brian Friel. And it was a lovely cast, wonderful actresses. I had the time of my life doing it. But it was said that the person who started the theater passed and still walked around there. Now, I was playing Rose, who was the somewhat dim-witted sister, and there was one matinee I think we had where seeing eye dogs were being trained to come and sit in on theaters. And during the part where we're dancing around, I'm on the floor, and one of the puppies, I remembered it was like a red golden retriever, came running up on the stage with me and said, "I want to play too. I want to dance at Lunasa too." So it was sort of like, it took a while to get the dog, put him back in the seat. But the audience just went crazy and loved it. And I thought, this is we've sort of broken the fourth wall here. So I went backstage and I was getting ready. I think it was getting close to the curtain call. And there was a man in it almost looked like a priest garb, a black frock coat, close, and a hat. And there was a stair that went up to a wall, like they had done remodeling and they just cut off where the staircase was. And I went back there and I went, "Hey, crazy, huh?" And he disappeared. So I went, okay, I'm just really jazzed up from this crazy performance of Dancing at Lunasa, and I'm seeing things, but that was totally weird. And then I thought, now, should I tell anybody, or am I going to be one of those high-strung actresses that are seeing things? And then I thought, no, I'll mention it to Martha, and see what she says. And she said, "Oh no, he's here all the time. He's here all the time." And I went, "Oh, I don't know if he liked the matinee shenanigans with the dog or not." And she went, "Probably not."
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That is amazing.
Even now at the Belasco Theater on Broadway, they're putting a show in there now. And there's a wonderful actor named Caesar who was in Come From Away. He just posted on his Instagram that he spotted Belasco in the last row. And Belasco's infamous for being sighted during tech rehearsals in that theater.
So could I ask you, because I know you do have an extensive Shakespearean background. Could you explain to people who are listening who might not quite understand why Shakespeare has a play that should not be named?
Ah, yes. There's several theories on this. The Scottish play at one time was so popular that if you were on the road, and they took down all the programming about what you were doing and put up the Scottish play, it meant the play was in trouble and that they needed revenue. And only by doing that play could you continue.
Wait, can I say the name of the play?
Yes, go ahead.
And
Yes.
be safe. So we're talking about Macbeth.
Yes. So that's the commercial aspect of it. The other aspect of it is that there are actually witches' spells by the three witches in Macbeth. And that the actors who play the witches, by and large, have traditional, safe things that they do before they do the incantation before him. And it's said that if you don't do these, regardless if the show is doing well or not, then catastrophes happen on stage. People get hurt during a sword fight. A Banquo's head that's supposed to float around won't float, whatever it is. So the three witches are usually really tight together in terms of making sure that, during Ellen Terry's time at the Lyceum Theater in the 1880s, there was a boycott because some Christians believed that they had come to see a black mass during Macbeth on stage. So, and of course, this is some conjecture because King James, of course, was convinced that there were witches and that he wanted Shakespeare's idea of witches to show that they were just evil, repugnant people who brought, catastrophe.
So isn't King James of England, wasn't he single-handedly responsible for the beginning of the witch hunts that would go on to kind of ravage the globe and kill thousands and thousands of men, women, and children?
That's right. And I believe that the story goes is he came to that conclusion because when he was trying to come back to claim his throne, his boat kept getting pushed out to sea by the wind. And people told him that the witches were on the shore blowing him away. So he vowed to wreak havoc.
And thus he did, unfortunately.
Yes.
I wonder if the burning of witches, the burning of women, the all of the theft and the ostracizing women who weren't playing by the rules or who had things that maybe their neighbors wanted. Do you think that was inevitable, or do you think that we could really point to a figure like King James in history? And would history have had a much different course had the wind not been blowing his ship off?
Well, I think there's a lot of things that men don't understand. And the fact that there might have been women who had property and were independent was terribly threatening to them. Mm-hmm. And so it was much easier to say they slept with the devil. And now we get to kill them and take all their property. But also there was this idea of, well, if you didn't go to one of our elite schools and you can't read and write, how the heck do you know how to cure anything? How do you know botanicals? How can you read minds? How can you talk to animals? You're just a beast, basically. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that women had been kept from learning, conventionally how to read and write and how to be in charge, the fact that there were still very powerful, awesome women who knew how to do a lot of these things was very threatening to men. And the fact that some of them died and had property, that was like the number one thing. Right. But there's a whole psyche part of it too that's threatening to them, that they don't understand how you know anything if they kept you from everything.
Right. If everything is theirs, how would you know? How would you have your own autonomous power outside of us? What's the spookiest thing that's ever happened to you? Can I ask you that?
Oh gosh, I wrote it down. Okay. So when I was a senior in high school in Spokane, Washington, you can tell we moved all around. We lived in a lot of spooky houses because we were in the Air Force. They were usually old houses that my parents were docents for. We lived in a scary one in Kittery Point, Maine, in Portsmouth, in Fremont, Nebraska. There were all these beautifully appointed Victorian homes, and my mother would usually be the one in charge of showing it around. So when we lived in Fremont, once again, there was this stairwell that was freezing cold. It could be Nebraska, it could be the middle of the summer, and that stair going upstairs would be so cold. And my dad at one point said, you have to be careful going up the stairs after 9:00. And we just thought he was trying to get us to go to bed early, because we're kids and it's past our bedtime. And I remember it, I can just see it so visually. There were these glass French doors that opened from the hallway into the vestibule, and then you go up the stairs. And we were standing, dad was like nagging us to go up there. And these two, or were there three little old ladies, appeared like ghostly flower etchings or sandpaper or something. And they went up the stairs and then they turned back and looked at us. And then as they disappeared into the wall, it was sort of like very ominous, like, go to bed. Unfortunately, where they disappeared was just on the other side of my bedroom. So I was not happy about that.
Did you see this alone or did you see this with your siblings?
Dad was standing on the other side of the French doors and he was saying, get up there and go to bed. I think Cynthia and Kurt were already up there. No, Kurt was downstairs. But I saw that and I was just like terrified from that hallway from then on. And Kurt actually heard a lot of things in that house too that scared him. There was screaming and yelling in the basement, always basements. But that was the most scared I've ever been because I don't know if they were trying to help Dad out with childcare or if they really hated having kids in the house. But it was definitely an energy. And the fact that my father said later on that he had seen them on occasion really sent it home.
Because I would imagine that your father was not prone to seeing ghosts on the regular.
No, but I did have a out-of-body experience with my dad. I was in high school. I had pneumonia. I was in the hospital. I wasn't expected to make it, actually. And I was sort of in a coma. And Dad showed up in his uniform, and he sat next to the bed, and he took out a roll of cherry lifesavers. And he unrolled it and then put like 3 of them on the nightstand where my body was. And I remember I was floating on the ceiling, looking down and thinking, oh, look, Dad's brought me lifesavers. Oh, I guess he's trying to save my life. I guess I should go back down. Okay, I'll go back down. So then I remember being there and waking up and he said, hello, Susie.
That's an extraordinary story.
Yeah.
Wow. So you were completely free floating from your body on your way, presumably,
Yeah.
to the other side. And
I wasn't afraid. I just remember looking down going, oh, he cares. And there's lifesavers. They're red, like blood. I should probably go back.
I think it's so interesting because time and time again you hear and you see, or maybe you had the experience to be with someone when they're cycling through death, that there is that the material things in the world that kind of bring a spirit back, bring a soul back. And it's a funny thing because you say cherry lifesavers, immediately I see the color red. I can see the shiny silver wrapping that's underneath, and I can taste it. You know, he couldn't have picked a more kind of piquant, sweet, intense treat to bring you back with.
And he wasn't an especially affectionate man. The fact that he knew that I liked cherry lifesavers, and I'm not sure if psychologically he understood he was literally throwing me a lifesaver, but it was really, really very dear.
That's amazing. So does an experience like that, does that give you peace when you think about either where you were before you were born or where you'll go after? Does it give you comfort?
It does give me comfort. I mean, I try not to panic that we only have so much time on this mortal coil, and I have so much more I want to do. But I am at peace with, as long as I can take every day and live it as fully as I can, the good, the bad, the anxious, all of it. Just be alive and admit that not every day is going to be fabulous, but it is going to be a life.
Right.
Then I have, what is it when you're really jealous, wish for something for somebody else? It's turning that energy inside out. When I panic about not being here for the next 30 years, which I probably won't, but I'll be happy for however long I am here, then I just have to say, I get to savor at least the next 6 hours, at least as long as to my knowledge. So we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Right. It's funny. It's those tantric qualities of life, right? That can really, no matter what, plug us back into, it gets us out of wherever our head may be. And it just reminds us that it is only on a moment to moment basis, right? Which is the crux of Buddhism and mindfulness. So that's very, very Interesting. I have to ask you also. I also moved to many houses as a young child, and I think that for kids who grow up on the move, living in multiple locations, moving every year, be they army brats or just for whatever reason, I feel like children who are constantly moving develop a very unique set of sensibilities. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I remember when we lived in Omaha and this big old Dutch type house, and something kept moving near my bed every morning, and I was terrified. And my sister Kathy had a terrible dream where she screamed so loudly she woke up the neighbors on both sides. And after that, the thing wasn't there anymore. And I told my mother years later that this thing would come and pace right next to my bedside. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh my gosh, that used to visit me too."
Wow.
Of course, we'd never talk about it at the time, but it was a big old, you think, no, it was scary. I'm not gonna lie, it was scary.
Has that creature come back again in your adult life that you know of for you or any of your family, or do you think that it's gone for good?
It came back once. It came back once when I was in Seattle with my first husband. It was on the bed, and we had to ask it to leave.
He saw it as well. He felt
He
it.
felt it, yeah.
So this is not a
Yeah.
night terror or sleep
No,
paralysis.
no,
This
no,
is
no,
not
no.
something that's happening
No,
to
no,
you
no.
while you're half awake, half asleep.
Nope,
Wow. And
nope.
and so the two of you asked it to leave and did it?
Well, he felt it first. He said, I'm having a really bad dream, but I think I'm awake and I think it's here." And I said, "I think I know what it is." And he said, "And I don't want to tell you about it because you'll be scared." And I said, I think I know what it is. Let's just tell it to leave, go." And it left. But it was definitely scary
That's
like that.
terrifying. Yeah, it's a good thing for people to know, I think though. That's like the first step. If I think that anything from the other side, it seems to me, and again, I'm not the end all be all expert. I don't claim to know 100%, but it does seem to me that putting down boundaries, right, is the first step, and more often than not they will leave, you know.
Have you had a presence like
Yes,
that,
yes, I
Sasha?
have, and I've on multiple occasions throughout my life had to ask things to leave, and fortunately, they always have. I've never had to call anybody in. But I think it's an interesting thing because as a kid who moves around a lot, you, I know I certainly did. I'm curious if you did the same thing. Every time you'd move into a new house, you would really go out of your way, I feel like, to feel what was in that house, to get comfortable so that you could sleep and play and relax completely. So, do you recall doing the same thing, and do you still have that sense of places now when you enter something or explore a house?
Well, I think as a visitor, we never really felt like we lived anywhere, because we knew we wouldn't be there long. It wasn't really our house. We didn't really have a place there. So I always felt like we explored it from a very outside
Hmm,
point of view, maybe open. If you're there all the time, you don't necessarily
right.
notice it. Um, so our feelings about it were, I think we were willing to give it a chance to be friendly, but I remember one time too, we were at Bonnie Bray. My grandparents were both gone working, and it was Cynthia and I and my brother and maybe a cousin. And from the basement, from the furnace where we think the underground slaves had been kept or stayed or whatever, we heard the most ominous sounds, like an evil thing cackling. And we were so scared. It's getting dusk. I think it was springtime or maybe it was early summer. And we were waiting by the side of the road for them to come up, in the car. We didn't want to be in the house at all. My grandfather got out of the car and we explained to him what happened. And he said, "Oh, just stop it. Just stop it. Just learn to live with it." So we went inside. Now, years later, the farm got hit by lightning. And my twin sister Cynthia was there when the insurance adjuster was there and they were going through what was in the house. And my grandfather, Courtney Wands, told the insurance adjuster, "There is something still missing." And the bean counter, the guy from the insurance company said, "What? I thought we have everything in your inventory." And he said, "There's been a ghost here for 50 years and it's not here anymore. I think I need compensation."
And did he receive compensation?
No, I think that was just my grandfather's Yankee way of saying for whatever, he was a man of very few words. And the fact that he would joke, we think, with the insurance adjuster that after lightning had hit the farm, that he didn't feel the ghost there anymore. That was about as open as he'd ever get to saying that he felt
Excellent,
something there.
excellent. Speaking of your grandparents, I have to ask you, do you share your grandmother's fondness for Ouija boards as devices to speak to ghosts, and or do you ever use your tarot cards or any other form of divination to speak to the other side?
I certainly use the tarot cards to channel, especially if it's my mom, because I feel like my mom still advises all of
Oh,
us kids, in terms of how we're going to get through this. And sometimes when I'm doing a reading for someone who's asking for a voice from the other side, I really despise this whole idea of fortune telling with
mm,
tarot cards. So I always try to tell people this is really about identifying archetypes that you know the answers inside. It's identifying your present so you can embrace your future, blah, blah, blah. But when someone comes to me and they're definitely trying to speak to someone who's passed and they have unresolved questions, I find that the cards are amazingly reflective, and not necessarily of
mhm.
what I want them to say, but of what is of comfort in the moment, not only to myself, but to the
Yeah.
querents as well.
Wow. 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 I think that's beautiful that you actually use the cards to communicate, to have conversations with people who have crossed over. Um, and again, it's a comforting way to, know as long as we remember people, they're never truly gone, right? I love.
And, we miss their voices so much. We miss what they would say. Now, whether it's our energies inventing the response, but sometimes the cards come out with the exact response
Yeah.
to a question. So, you just take it on face value of what it says to you. I mean, does that happen with you, Sasha, when you do a tarot reading with a specific
Yeah,
question?
I talk to my grandmother all of the time, and I feel like I invoke her energy all of the time when I'm doing things that we would do together or delighted in something the way that we would delight. So I do feel like I'm in constant fairly regular communication with her. Um, so I don't necessarily have a conversation with her through the tarot, although I have in the past had people, when I would do professional readings, people would from time to time ask me about someone who had crossed over. And I would always say, I would never call myself a medium, but I'll pull a card and tell you what the message of that card is. And let's say that that message is from the person who's crossed over. Um, and it's always something lovely, and it always seems to have been meaningful. But yeah, it's not. I don't use the cards for that so much. I go directly to the source. I just start talking like they're right there.
But I love the synchronicity of your father's name
Isn't that
showing up.
wild?
I mean, it's beyond our understanding of philosophy sometimes about how these, I mean, never in a million years. Eric was the most pragmatic, no nonsense artist I'd ever met. If you were to tell me that after Eric passed, he'd be sending messages to Cynthia and I, and it's only when Cynthia and
Hmm.
I are talking. It hasn't happened with anything else, but I think Eric knows that
Yeah.
she's safe with me and that I'll take care of her and console her. But the fact that the synchronicity of these images are coming through at a time when she's really missing him and wondering, is he still
Yeah.
around? Has been really
Amazing.
reassuring.
So, do you have any other spooky stories you'd like to share with us?
Oh gosh, I did write another one down. Here it is. Okay, sorry, there's a
Oh,
funny
good. We
one.
love funny. We love funny ghost stories.
So I was doing a play in Glen Falls, New York, which is
Mhm.
near Lake George. And, Lake George has this amazing amusement boardwalk, which was started by someone I think named Charles Wood. And when I went up there for the housing, the very, very nice patrons of the theater said, "Lucky you, you get to stay in our beautiful mansion. We're actually going to be in New York in our apartments and blah, blah, blah. But you get to stay here." And I went, "Oh my God, I can't wait." Because, my grandparents' farm wasn't that far away. And I'd heard about this mansion for years. And I was so excited to stay there by myself.
Oh no.
By myself, Sasha. So it's a big, beautiful house, 2 stories, all these bedrooms and stuff. But I was really unnerved because, you come home, literally, the halls are echoing. Every room is huge. You have to turn on lights in every room. And we were doing a really fun little play called Leaving Iowa, where I played a mom in a car. It was basically my job. Nothing serious, nothing like Lady M or any Blanche Dubois. No, it was mom in a cardigan. So I would come home pretty lighthearted. And then the minute I would come in, I'd really almost start to panic. Just because it was big and scary and all that sort of stuff. And when I would go upstairs to close my door, I could hear footsteps in the hallway. And I'd going, who are they? Are they happy I'm here? Why didn't they tell me? So thank goodness another actress in the show, Stephanie, was going, "Oh, you know where I'm staying? It's like there's a baby and I can't sleep and everything." Well, I got on the phone with the patrons and went, "Oh, you know what? There's another actress in the show and she's so lonely and I just know it'd be such a big ask. It was so wonderful if she could just stay here with me." And then, "Oh, sure, whatever." So Stephanie came over. I did not tell her. I was thrilled to have her there, but also I was thrilled to have just another living person in the house. So she comes up, she goes home, she goes in, and everything's quiet. And then I just heard the same footsteps, but they were so much lighter, but they stopped in front of my door.
Did you open the door? Good.
No, I didn't. But that was the last time they were there. But it was sort of like, really? I mean, I felt like the ghost was going, "Oh, really? You had to get back up?" Fine. But it was like it was so wonderful to be in this fantastic, beautiful dream of a house. And then how it
Yes.
changed. I mean, you can see why they say spooky mansions and something dark in every corner. And these people were so lovely to let me stay in I mean, I was driving their fancy car. I was staying in their big fancy house. I was living a life I didn't have, except for the ghost.
So I have to ask you, this makes me think of like the House on Haunted Hill and all of those classic, iconic, wonderful ghost stories. But what part, I know what my answer is. What part of house do you find the spookiest? Like, if you're in a big, empty, haunted house, which part of it, and I know that includes many terrifying places, but where to you is the most terrifying spot of a house?
Hallways. Maybe it was the house in Glen Falls, but no, the staircase in Fremont, the staircase in Kittery Point. It's places where people are traveling through. Their energy is in transit and it's cold. I never feel it like in big, lovely, warm rooms with a fireplace or even a bedroom so much, but definitely for me, hallways. What about you?
Bathrooms terrify me. Bathrooms terrify
Do
me,
they?
and especially what's behind shower curtains.
Oh,
Even
yes.
right now, just thinking about it.
Uh-huh.
And then even if I'm like, and I can remember being little and in the shower, and then when you're actually in the shower, what's the next terrifying place is like, what's in the drain? Or what
Yeah.
at my grandmother's house, it was like, I guess, ahead of its time. We had like a giant rain, it would come straight down on you, and I would look up and it looked like an eyeball looking. Oh, it was just, bathrooms scare me. I feel like it's where you're the most vulnerable and where people are quite
hmm
vulnerable, and also where they're the most private.
Yes, yes. The last place you expect
Oh
another person to
God.
be.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness. Well, on that note, now that I'm completely chilled, Susan, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. It was fun to get scared and think of all the scary things with
Spooky.
you.
I'd love to have you return. I know you work on historical fiction, and in writing historical fiction, you're often sharing energy with people and channeling people who did live these big and rich lives. So I'd love to have you on in the future, just to talk about what it's like to channel energies as a writer, because we didn't even scratch the surface of that.
Yes, and I'd love to talk about the appearances of some of these characters who have come back to visit other people
Oh,
too.
all right. We'll wait with
Woohoo.
bated
All
breath.
right.
Susan Wands, thank you so much for joining us at the fire. Thank you so much for being part of Ghost Stories by the Fire. Do you have a spooky story, near-death experience, or supernatural happening you'd like to share? I'd love to hear it. Submit your story to sashagraham.com with Ghost Stories by the Fire in the subject line. You might just wind up on this podcast. And if you want to support it and keep the ghost stories coming, head on over to sashagraham.com to check out my books and tarot decks, which are available for purchase at your favorite bookseller. The Ghost Stories by the Fire theme song is titled Lovely, from the original motion picture score of The Deeper You Dig, a film about the lengths a mother will go to find her daughter's killer. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, I'm saving you a seat at the fire.